This is Wavemaker Conversations. I'm Michael Schulder, and as I speak, we are entering week 2 of the war in Iran. Our guest today did not address the war specifically, but what she has to say is very germane to how this all plays out. As you may recall, in January, there were widespread nationwide demonstrations in Iran, led by students in many cases. The regime and its so-called Revolutionary Guards, which is sort of a parallel organization to the regular army, the regime ruthlessly crushed these demonstrations. They killed in the thousands. We don't know how many thousands, maybe many, many thousands. And then began something that's traditional in Iran, a 40-day period of mourning. And this is where I really got fascinated because I hadn't really known about the 40-day period of mourning. I didn't know how long a tradition it was, but I kept hearing that on the 40th day, they were expecting another round of demonstrations. So instead of ending it in a somber way, they were going to come out, the anti-regime protesters, despite what just happened, despite all the people who were killed, despite the risk they were taking. And I thought, I really want to try to understand, where does that courage come from? Is the source of their courage somehow connected to this tradition of the 40-day mourning period? And so to try to get my arms around that, I reached out to the great Iranian American author, Azar Nafisi. Azar was born in Iran, grew up in Iran. Her father was a mayor of Tehran, a very independent-minded guy who spent 4 years in prison. And he spent that time in prison because of his sense of independence, and he did not want to cross a certain line that violated his ethics. And we're going to hear the details of that story during this conversation. Her mother, also a powerful force, one of the first women to enter parliament in Iran. Azar came over here to the United States in the 1970s, studied literature, and received a PhD from University of Oklahoma in American and English literature. When the revolution happened, she went back to Iran, hoping very optimistically to bring her knowledge of Western and literature to the college students in this new generation in Iran. The challenges she faced were much, much greater than she could have ever expected. She was fired from the University of Tehran after 2 years because she refused to wear the veil, the hijab, which had become mandatory under Islamic rule. She ended up working for a couple of other Iranian universities over the years. There were some periods of somewhat liberalized approach. Ultimately, she resigned from her final teaching post in Iran and began a series of secret sessions. She chose 7 young women, 7 of her very best and most hardworking students. And these women gathered with her in her apartment in Tehran once a week, and they took some risk doing this. They would discuss literature among the books Pride and Prejudice, The Great Gatsby, Nabokov's Lolita, which is where she got the title for the book that was based on this whole experience, Reading Lolita in Tehran, which, by the way, was on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 100 weeks, has been translated into more than 30 languages. It's really had a big impact on people who have read it. I strongly recommend it. So in any event, she's the one I reached out to get my handle on this source of courage and this whole idea of the 40th day. And as we're in this war, we can imagine that there are going to be many more 40th days to come. For some personal background, I have known Azar for more than 10 years. We've had many conversations. Every time I speak with her, I leave with insights that I didn't have before, and I leave feeling uplifted. And part of that is her spirit and the wisdom that she shares. And I hope you feel the same way as well. So here is my conversation with Azar Nafisi. Azar Nafisi, first of all, thank you for joining me again on Wavemaker Conversations.
Absolute pleasure. I love talking to you.
I love speaking with you too. And I'd like to start with this idea of 40 days, the traditional mourning period in Iran. It's a cultural thing, and it goes back to how far does 40 days of mourning go back?
Well, it goes back to the time of Zoroastrianism, which was the first religion that Iran accepted. And it was also a way of living. And the
And
idea,
by the way, how far back is that
it goes
roughly?
back to at least 2,000 years ago. It's very old. And the interesting thing about it all is that with the 40th days, it is rooted in the ancient part of Iran, in the history of Iran. But what these protests are doing, they are resurrecting the past in order to understand and change the present. And so the 40th day, the idea is that people, relatives, friends, they gather and mourn the person who's going, because now his spirit will travel to another place. And somehow the Shia religion picked up on this, and they turned it into a day of mourning for the martyrdom of the third Imam, Imam Hussein. And so much of what this regime has done in Iran is under the banner of what it calls Islam. And on the 40th day every year, there are these rituals of people coming into the streets even and beating themselves. But what these protests did, they turned this from a culture of death into a culture of life. Because people usually go to mourning on the 40th, there's crying, there's mourning, But what happened with these demonstrations, people would go to the grave of their loved ones and they sing, they dance. So they changed, they subverted what the regime was doing with martyrdom, because the regime constantly brings to our lives as a culture of death. And the answer, the response, especially the young Iranians gave to this, was to immerse themselves in a culture that both brings continuity to them and also it is a form of resisting not just this regime, resisting death. From the very start of the Islamic revolution's conquest of Iran, I call it conquest. From that moment on, there was this chasm between the Iranian people and the regime. So this struggle that we see now, where people go into the streets knowing they might not come back, this that you see now, it is not just political, it is existential. People are literally fighting for their identity, for their life. And one of the first things that an absolutist regime, like the regime of the Islamic Republic, does is try to take away from the citizens their real identities. It is to be so powerful that it tells the citizens, you are not who you say you are. You are going to be who I say you are. And there is this creating a society that is based on lies, where the citizens have their identity as both citizens of the country and as individuals has been confiscated, has been taken away from them. And part of the function of these protests is to go back and retrieve that real Iran with which the majority of Iranians agree. Now, there was another thing I wanted to tell you. It's not just the 40th that at the beginning of the revolution, this regime was fighting against celebrating what we call Nowruz in Persian, which means the new day. And it is on 21st of March, where again, ancient Iranians they celebrated on 21st of March the rebirth of life. And so that is for our new year. And this regime was saying that all these things are pagan and you should not do it. And they went so far that some of them at the Islam were saying that Iranian citizens should not give names to their children which come from the ancient Iranian mythology, you know. And before Nowruz, on the Wednesday before Nowruz, ancient Iranians worshipped fire. And there is, on Wednesday before Nowruz, people come into the streets or go into their yards and they have bonfires. And they sing to the fire. They say, your color red, which is health, should be ours, and our illnesses, color yellow, belongs to, we're throwing it away. So they throw away all the evil and badness of the previous year.
May I ask you something? Right now you're wearing what seems to be sort of a red sweater. Is that right?
Yes.
Was that coincidence, or you just like the color red because it symbolizes health?
I do like red. I mean, and actually, I felt for this conversation, the kind of conversation we're going to have, I like to choose a color that sort of sparkles.
That's so much more moving than why I wore this dark blue shirt. I just thought it looked good against my face. So much more vanity on my part for why I chose my clothes.
It is also our desire for beauty, for harmony, that is what they took away from us. I mean, women.
Literally, the desire for beauty they took away from you. Yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted you because tell me how that fits into what you experienced when you were in Iran after the revolution.
Well, there was, of course, both outrage. I felt all through the years I lived in the Islamic Republic. There was outrage and there was grieving. But what kept me going was the fact that, first of all, I was sharing this. I was not alone in these feelings. You would get on a bus and the two militia are sitting there, and you turn around or something. But there is this sense of togetherness between people who have never met before, but against the regime, there was not just protests and shouting, there was also this silence boycott of the regime, you know.
And how did that play out?
Well, part of it was in the protests, but I remember something my father told me. He said, "This country is very ancient, and it has been invaded so many times. But what has kept us going, what gives us continuity as Iranians, is our poetry." And he is right. Um, I can explain this to you a little better by an anecdote. At the beginning of the revolution, the regime brought down the statues of the king and his family, and wherever the streets were named, they took them all out. Then they started wanting to take the statue of our great epic poet, Ferdowsi, who lived over 1,000 years ago. And Iranians constantly refer to Ferdowsi as their real ancestor, almost, you know.
Is that across the board, including, those who might support the current regime? Is that a universal?
It is universal. It is amazing. So the regime was against Ferdowsi. I mean,
Before you go on, so it's incredible to me because in our country we have certain things that may unite everyone, but the idea that a poet is a link between, for the most part, everyone in the country. So if you just went up to the random person on the street, we can't know how well educated everybody is, but even people who don't have a higher education would know Ferdowsi and would connect with you.
yeah, I mean, and something that almost always caught my attention in Iran when you're driving is that the trucks, for example, at the back of the trucks, there is a poem by Ferdowsi or Saadi or Hafiz. When children are born in Persian families, usually, one of the things that the parents do, they open Hafiz to ask him what will be the fate of this child. The Orthodox Muslims put Quran, Islam's holy book, but the majority of Iranians, including Muslims, they open Hafiz to ask him what kind of a year they will have.
So this poet has so much power that they open the book, they ask for an answer to the most important question, which is starting with what will become of my child. Is the answer in that book? Do you read poems when you give birth to a child from Hafez?
Well, my family would do it. Some families do it, but when I was young, my father would take me for these long walks, and he will teach me. I didn't know the words well, but he would read me Hafiz.
By the way, that image of a father reading his young daughter poetry,
Yeah.
maybe she didn't even understand. It makes my kids are grown, but I want to go back and, we read a lot to our kids, but that's such a beautiful image that if any parents are listening now, that doesn't have to be just a Persian ritual, but I want to come back to your father because I know he held a very important position in government and political leadership, which is, just makes you even, there's so many layers with you, Azar. So I have to figure out what layer to stick on. So first of all, you talked about, the identity and how this is really existential for many of these demonstrators. And we know that several thousand were killed, maybe many more. So what's fascinating to me is, mourning, sometimes that doesn't end. I mean, it doesn't necessarily end the process of grief, But
No.
but to think about how much, in this case, courage people people get from the idea that this is the 40th day, and from what I've read, and I want to know what your experience is politically, that people in Iran who don't like the current regime, who really want to see it disappear, will find inspiration on that 40th day and literally risk their lives. And just to give you just one short story, I recently interviewed a woman who's a Putin Russia expert. She grew up, well, first 7 years she spent in the Soviet Union with Russian parents. They came over here in the early 70s. And we were talking about Stalin, and we were talking about why there are not major demonstrations against Putin ever, against the war. And she explained that the memories of Stalin and, how many people he killed, how many Russians lost their lives in World War II, which she said is another reason Putin always refers to World War II. I mean, she had an image. She said, the Soviet Union beat Nazi Germany on its front because it literally drowned the enemy in its blood, in its own blood.
Yeah.
And I think so. And she says that has been translated, transmitted to the younger generation. You don't have to mention the potential consequences. They know what the potential consequences are. And as a result, she said, Putin doesn't have to kill a lot of people who are demonstrating or protesting. It just takes you need to make an example of just a couple of people. So I heard that story, and now I'm looking at Iran, where you don't need a memory from many years ago. It's just 40 days ago, you saw the people who you connect with gunned down, and yet they come out yet again to demonstrate. So tell me about the connection between that and how identity is a motivator for that. It's beyond the ability for most people to comprehend, to put ourselves in that situation.
Well, the problem of identity, um, uh, many people don't pay attention to it. But one of the most difficult times I had when I was in Iran was, in fact, around identity. And in the film of my book, Reading Lolita in Tehran, there is a scene where the woman puts on the hijab while looking at herself in the mirror. And that feeling was for me so humiliating. Every morning when I woke up, I would put on my clothes trying to hide who I am. Not, I mean, how can I be a good teacher? How can I be a defender of human rights? How could I be a good mother if I don't believe in who I am? So you notice anywhere in the world that there is an absolutist, a totalitarian regime, their first job is to fabricate. They fabricate their own role, they confiscate your history, and they try to shape you according to their, I don't know if they have any imagination, but according to their desire and wishes. And so every time I walked in the street or would go to the university, I instinctively would show a little bit of my hair, which is most Iranian women did. Because even just showing that, I was telling them that you don't own me, that you are not going to reshape, restructure me. And that is what is getting them. That is what is making them so angry. Here is someone like Nika, someone like Masa, these young, innocent girls who can get under the skin of these powerful men by being themselves.
I mean, Nika is really, tell us briefly the story of Nika, because she is a very significant young woman in this whole latest chapter in Iranian protest, and it connects to the power of poetry. So tell me, who is Nika?
Well, I know so little about her, but just looking at her photograph, her image, that you look into those eyes and mm, um, you see life, and even in death she evokes life. And these people arrested her. Um, they beat her up. They beat her up. They did damage to her skull. And then they raped her. These men of God raped the 17-year-old Mika. And Mika, when I looked at Nika, when I looked at her image, I remembered my own students. I had, I would like to tell the story of one of my students. Is it okay?
Yeah, please.
Well, because this student, I I tell her story and I write her story almost every time I give a talk or write, because the only thing we are, even when there is no Islamic Republic, we're all gonna die. I mean, we're all every moment dying. And one great thing literature does, um, it stands up to fickleness of life and to absoluteness of death. Because through becoming guardian of memory, through not talking about Nika so that Nika would almost enter your bloodstream, you know, and becomes part of you. We keep them. It is conclusive evidence that we have lived. And that is one really essential work that literature does. Now, I had a student named Razieh, and I was teaching at a girls' college at the time, and I was teaching contemporary and modern American novel. Razieh was a serious Muslim, and she always wore her veil and everything. But she was also very intelligent and almost very naturally moral. You know, she loved all the novels we read, but she especially liked Henry James. And this, for people that cannot understand a Muslim girl falling in love with this old American man, you know. But it became a habit between Razieh and I, where at the end of the class, she would come to me and she'll talk about James and others. And she told me that she loves James because of his independent women, because his women in his novels were ready to sacrifice their own happiness, but do the right thing. And one day she was talking about this. She got very excited when she was talking about these things. And she smiled at me and said, I think I'm falling in love, you know. Uh, and then, anyway, at the end of that term, I left that school and didn't see Razieh. I saw her only once when I was walking on one side of the street and she was coming from the other side. And at that time, they were the regime had started another attack on Iranians, and they would disappear people in the streets and all of that. So she was telling me not to approach her because she was active in an opposition organization, and she was in danger.
How did she communicate that to you?
She did this, you know, and of course the expression in her face, I can see her right now. Anyway, a few years later, after I left that university, another student of mine came to visit me, and she told me that she just has been jailed. She just got off for good behavior. I didn't ask her what good behavior means in the Islamic Republic. And she said that I was in the same cell as your student Razieh, and we had a good time together. She would talk about Henry James. I would talk about Scott Fitzgerald. And the way she said in your class, we put Great Gatsby on trial. And she said the warden was very much worried by the way we were laughing. We were having a good time talking about these writers. Anyway, she told me, you know, that Razieh was executed. And I didn't know. And so many times I have imagined her, the smile when she talked about James and how alone she must have been. But I thought at the same time, no matter how cruel life is, no matter how near, close to you death is, you still have freedom. You have the freedom to choose how you die. Will you give these people the pleasure of repenting, or will you have the courage to do what Razieh did, you know? And I have a lot of examples like this. My former principal at high school, Dr. Farrukhru Parsa, she was, after being the principal of my school, she, along actually with my mother and four other, she was part of this group of women, six of them, that were the first women to enter the parliament. And my mother, of course, could not abide any kind of authority. So she was just trouble for people.
And by the way, this was roughly what year? This was under the Shah?
Yeah, 1963. And she was so subversive that they didn't allow her to run the next term, you know. But
So there was a term limit. She only got one term, too subversive.
not one term. I mean, when my father was in jail, she would call the head of security general, and just really give it to him. Say, I know you bastards, you know, you. I mentioned in my memoir that my mother was like a weapon and like an explosive, that each person would give it to the other to so that she won't explode in her hands, you know. But
Well, I have to pause you there, though, because again, for people who are not familiar with your life or haven't read your memoir, and remind me the title of your memoir, which I have read. Remind me the title.
Things I have been silent about.
Things I have been silent about, which is, first of all, such a great title. because I know you're going to be no longer silent about some fascinating
Oh,
things.
no,
But
that's
but
great.
going back to your father, you just mentioned he was in jail. He was also a leader in politics. Just
Yep.
tell the audience, just tell the listeners, just a little bit about your father, so we have a little more complete picture about what produced Azar Nafisi.
Yeah, my father, well, his main occupation almost was poetry. I have here three books, children's books he wrote, where um, uh, he said he has written them for his children and grandchildren. And they were the classics of Iranian poetry, one from Ferdowsi, from Nizami. He was a good mayor. He was mayor of Tehran, and mayor of Tehran is like mayor of New York type of a thing.
Now that we have a picture of your mother, the explosive device,
Yeah.
and your father who wound up in jail, why was he incarcerated?
Well, it is very ironic. He had a problem with the prime minister and the minister of state because he was a rebel. I mean, my family can never work within a framework. But there was um, a time in early 1960s when um, there was the Shah was bringing what he called changes to Iran through the White Revolution, and the clerics, especially Ayatollah Khomeini, rose up against it. And there were many people in protests who were um, wounded, and the prime minister had said that the hospitals should not see to the wounded. And my father went against that, and he went to the hospitals to make sure. And he also uh, and he was explaining that these people we don't trust, these people we don't like, they're our enemy, but we don't act like enemies. We don't act like them because we become them. And he also believed that you have to have a line of communication with these people to know where they are. If you want to fight with them, you need to know them. And so um, they sent him to jail. And I never forget those years, because the first thing father told me and my brother was that we should not show any weakness and we should not cry, because he said, if you cry, it means that you believe I have done something, and I haven't.
Oh, you mean don't cry over his jailing.
Yeah, he's jail. And he wrote a lot of poetry in jail, and he had a diary about 1,000 pages. I used some of that diary for my memoir. And he but the difference with the Shah's regime and this one is that if my father acted the way he did towards Shah and his emissaries, um, uh, if he had done that in the Islamic Republic, he would be dead. But with the Shah, they sent the Minister of Security to meet my father in jail. And he told him, if you write a letter and say that you're sorry, all will be forgotten and we won't have a trial. He said, I want a trial because I want to say what I have not been able to say. I want to defend myself. And they kept him in jail for 4 years before they gave him a trial. And he began the his defense with a poem with 2 lines from Ferdowsi. And he from Gandhi to Elward and Jane Austen and not Jane Austen. I wrote Jane Austen. Um, he was Victor Hugo. He brought through. It seemed as if these poets and writers from all around the world are his witnesses. They're witnesses to what has been done to him. But anyway, um, he was um, he was at first exonerated of all and uh, was told that there's only one instance where he was not forgiven, and that was the crime of insubordination. And since that day, I have really liked insubordination. I mean, I constantly use that and subverse it.
I almost feel, well, first of all, we've talked about it in the past, the search for titles. So, your next memoir can be titled The Insubordinate Subversive.
I'm going to write it down. And, I thought about my next book to call it I'll See You in My Book. It is, I don't know if you know that anecdote about the Swedish playwright Strindberg. They say that Strindberg was in this bar, and this guy comes and invites him to a fight. So they go outside and they start fighting. In the middle of the fight, Strindberg stops and tells the man, "I see you in my book, you bastard," and walks back towards the bar.
Oh my gosh. That reminds me when we were touring the Sistine Chapel and the ceiling, and they were telling us about this, when Michelangelo was painting it, there was a very annoying sort of representative of the Pope who was just hovering over him. He didn't,
Oh,
Michelangelo was very upset with him. And so he painted in on the ceiling this particular representative of the Pope with a snake wrapped around his private part. Sort of like, I'll see you on the ceiling.
yes, I see you. I mean, that is all writers and poets and artists have,
So there's a lot of power there. So to bring it to the current news,
Uh-huh.
so there have been some, we don't know how many, but there have been some follow-up demonstrations since the 40 days, correct?
Especially the recent one, which is very important, was all these universities.
Yes, the day the universities reopened.
Yeah.
And what did you notice in those news stories of the reopenings that struck you? And how does it connect to your experience? What struck you? How do you really? What I'm asking is, how do you, when you watch the news, or in this case, listen, because the images are so limited, but what are you seeing? Is it giving you hope? Do you feel like, clearly you don't feel like anything is a lost cause?
Mm.
But what struck you about these 40-day plus demonstrations?
Well, I remember after Mahsa Amini died, and the movement sort of was not as active as
And
people.
Masa Hamini, just, for the
Oh,
general audience, remind us who she was.
well, Mahsa Amini was this amazing Kurdish woman who was arrested by Iran's what they call morality police. And they took her to jail and they beat her up so much that she died. And with her death,
For what crime? Alleged
oh,
crime.
yes, the crime of not wearing the hijab. These
So it comes back again.
Yeah,
to this struggle for identity.
yeah, yeah. That is at the center of it. You know, people keep, some people, not all, but on both right and left, try to tell me that this hijab or all the other things that are happening, um, these are uh, their culture. So many of my friends in America tell me, but this is their culture. And sometimes they tell me, you're westernized. It's so insulting. I mean, they want to, with all good intentions, some of them, not all of them are bad intent, but it is worse when someone with good intentions tells you that marriage at the age of 9 for females is a culture of a country, that stoning people to death is culture of our country. And these people know nothing about Iran, and they don't take the trouble to know. We were talking about the past of Iran. I mean, 5,000 years. This culture has lived, you know, and then they tell me it's your culture. And I tell them, if this is my culture, then Inquisition and fascism and communism are culture of the West. Here we learn from Iranian women again. Um, at first, the beginning of the revolution, when Ayatollah Khomeini gave a fatwa for hijab, thousands of women came into the streets. And one of their main slogans was, freedom is neither Eastern nor Western. Freedom is universal. And this, my student Razieh and thousands of students like her have proved by reading and talking better than some of my American students about these writers. And I tell my American, I mean, I used to, not, I'm not teaching anymore, but I would tell my students that literature and poetry and film have no boundaries. They don't belong to someone, and you can, you know, they belong to people who care about them. And right now, Iranian students care more about America's writers and poets than the American students do. So actually, Henry James and Jane Austen belong to Iran as much as they belong to England or to America. You know, so the reason I said that was, it is so unfair to say that wanting to be free, you need to be westernized. If they go into history of Iranian women's struggle, first of all, if you read Ferdowsi, the women in Ferdowsi are so strong, and they drink and they make love. Another poet who was also living at the time Ferdowsi lived, one of the most beautiful love poems, 1,000 pages he has written. The women in his books, they are the harbinger of hope.
That's fascinating to me, and actually, so the two things. So these women who are the harbinger of hope. You kindly said that the tagline of Wave Maker Conversations that I use, which is where curiosity meets hope,
Yes,
resonated with you. Has
yes.
it played out? Give me one example of where curiosity, something you truly didn't know the answer to, but wanted to find out, and may have found out some bad stuff along the way, but ultimately led to hope. Can you give to well-founded hope? Can you give me one example of that, either from what you're watching currently play out in Iran, or from where you were uh, fighting to protect your identity back in Iran?
Well, actually, these students I was talking about, um, they, because so much of the world was taken away from them, they were deprived of that connection. They became, by nature, curious because they wanted to know what kind of a world is that world which is now inaccessible to them, and how can
Which was now inaccessible at
yes,
that moment.
yeah, because you couldn't go to England or go to US if you were a young Iranian student. That was taken, plus the fact that uh, all of these books and or music we talk about, it all went underground. Uh, but people became curious. They wanted to know, and not just my secular students, a lot of my Muslim students, including the president of Muslim Student Association, who kept standing by my door and wanting to talk to me about things. And one day he comes with something in a black plastic bag, and he tells me that I got this from the Marines who were in the Gulf. And he said, I brought it for you. And it was a video of Tom Hanks's Big. So this Orthodox Muslim kid fell in love with Tom Hanks. You don't know how excited he was about it. And I have students who at the beginning of my classes have told me, why are you teaching Wuthering Heights? It is about adultery. And at the end of the term, and I'm not exaggerating, at the end of the term, they'll come to me and say, do you have more books like Wuthering Heights? And they say that our roommates at the door make fun of me because I constantly say Catherine and Heathcliff, you know. So this curiosity is needed in order for us as human beings to connect to one another. Otherwise we die if we don't have curiosity, and because of curiosity, if we don't have empathy. So much of what is happening that is terrible in this world is lack of empathy.
And it's fostered in part, I'm thinking of Iran now, by a curious person from outside Iran not being able to connect with Iranian people.
Yeah.
And and I guess that's part of the strategy is, don't enable those connections. Here in the US, it's not like we're prevented from connecting with other people, but so many of us have gotten into the habit of just not reaching out across geographic boundaries, cultural boundaries. We have the freedom to, but it takes a lot to do it. Uh, there's something you had mentioned with identity. Uh, you love fire and poetry and beauty are three things. Did you say that you worship? Fire, poetry, and beauty.
Well, yeah, fire has more symbolic.
Symbolic. So let me, going back to some of the young women who have been killed during this uprising, and I might have shared this with you. I stumbled on it in a publication called Liberty's Journal.
Huh.
Liberty's Journal, uh, another great tagline. Their tagline is, "There's nothing artificial about our intelligence." So, but there are a lot of. I haven't explored it too much, but they have a lot of material on about different religions, and so this is called A Poem for Atash, and Atash means
fire.
And I didn't realize how important that word atash is. So this is Atash Shakarimi. So Nika Shakarimi, who you told us about. So I'll just read you the description. Atash Shakarimi, the aunt of 16-year-old Nika Shakarimi, who was arrested and killed during the 2022 Women Life Freedom Uprising. Atash, the aunt, was flogged 38 times in Tehran in November of 2025. And so this is a poem that a poet, her name is Fatima Jamalpour, the poet wrote this for Atash. Is that how you pronounce it? Atash?
Yes, Atash. Atash.
Atash. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
so I would love, because you'll read it better than I will in English, I'm going to share the screen.
Oh my God, and without even
Well,
practicing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 days before the flogging, fire began to practice, leaving her body. We're not only our bodies, she told herself. If I stay aware, it is harder for them to shame me through it. She cooked for the coming days, stacked meals in the fridge, food for the woman who would be flogged. She bought 2 tubes of numbing cream the night before. She could not sleep. She played with her cat, trimmed and watered the flowers, showered, and stood the night before she could not sleep. Played with the cat, watered the flowers, showered, stared at Nika's face on the wall. Almost eyes, thick brows, a long, fine nose. A girl the world had already seen dancing hip hop, burning her scarf before the night the batons changed her face to something a mother could not recognize. In the morning, Atash coiled her orange hair. Resistance is beautiful, she told the mirror. 2 hours before the sentence, she spread the cream from shoulders to lower back, wrapped plastic around her waist, pulled on a tighter shirt. 2 hours of numbness in the car. She peeled off the plastic, wiped the cream away. Outside the prosecutor's office, she swallowed strong codeine, 300 milligram tablets. On November 3rd, in Tehran, they flogged the fire, flame of justice. At 10 a.m., fire entered the courthouse. An officer was finishing another woman. How severe? The lawyer asked. We are obliged, the judge said. It's our duty. Fire stepped into the execution room. An ordinary office, desk, chairs, rows of files. The enforcer was a woman in her 40s. No black chador, just manto, trousers, scarf. A clerk you might pass on a bus. In her right hand, a fine brown leather whip, its strands precisely braided, a wooden handle, 2 palms long. Face the wall, hands on the wall. Count so I don't strike more than ordered. On November 3rd, they pinned fire to a wall and flogged her, but Atash did not count. My mother is counting at home, she told herself, as the whip rose and fell on her back. 1, 2, 3, 38, 38 lashes, 30 months of Nika's murder. Fire stepped out, a stylish clerk with shaped eyebrows, slid a paper forward. Fire certified that after the flogging she had left in good health. At 12:20 p.m. she walked out, calm, a smile set against pain. We couldn't stop the sentence, her lawyer told the woman who had come to stand with fire. She reached home, took painkillers, and slept. Her heart, her mind. This woman is a mountain, and deep inside the mountain lives Nika. The girl who burned her staff is still alive, dances inside, fire inside Atesh. I think it's very difficult to say anything. I think she brings the feeling of it. And the feeling comes to us on several levels. There is Atash, but when Nika is gone, um, there's someone to keep her memory, and Atash is that harbinger of hope.
I think that that poem ties together so much of
Yeah,
what you've shared today.
yeah.
The very last thing, because in the news right now is this
Mm.
question of whether the United States will launch a war against Iran. And given what you know about the importance of identity, does for these young people who are demonstrating in an existential way to protect their identity and live a fuller life, as they see headlines, if they can, as they consider the fact that the U.S. might invade Iran, and one of the reasons the U.S. government is giving is, well, it's for the Iranian people who want to rise up and overthrow this government. Put us in the position, not that you can speak for everybody, but for those in Iran, is identity, how does that shape their identity or the parts of their identity?
The war, you mean, if there is a war?
If the United States launches a war against Iran, which is threatening to do right now, uh, how do you think that affects in any way the young people who are on the front lines of these demonstrations? Is it good for them, bad for them? How does it impact their sense of identity? What would that accomplish, or what would it damage?
Well, I was actually, you had asked the question which I never um, completely answered, but um, you know, I don't. U.S. needs to have a strategy before I think that they can win a war, or what kind of a war, or how the Iranian people would uh, respond to it. What I want, I mean, if democracies like America wanted to help Iran, one of the first steps they would take is what finally Europe did, where they boycotted the Revolutionary Guards. Uh, you know, I think that the Iranian people would like, if there is anything coming from the West, to not be a violence direct against them, but there's a lot that they can do. For example, all these money that the regime have um, taken out of the country and into banks uh, in Western countries and others. They can freeze their assets. Many of these officials have green cards, and their children have green cards, or citizenship even. I think they are the ones who should not be. They were teaching. So many of them still are teaching at our universities. Some one or two of them because of The protests here, they finally sacked them, but not all of them. You know,
Well, as I'm thinking about this and things, that people who earnestly want to help the people of Iran who want to throw off the yoke of this, of the rulers, um, I think about often on U.S. college campuses, there are demonstrations, and this will be the last question I ask you. Um, is there, do you think that demonstrations against the Iranian regime in favor of whatever policy, we think would help the Iranian people, do you think that demonstrations on college campuses would in some way be able to help the young women and others who have been demonstrating against the regime?
it definitely does. I mean, I have no doubt. Unfortunately, their politics and ideology rules more than empathy.
Rules who more?
Rules all our societies. I mean, um, so many parts of the world are now in turmoil, and uh, the ones that at least I heard of, it's Palestine, it is um, Sudan, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and also Iran. They are all in turmoil. And I wish that these movements would at least announce solidarity with one another. But
Oh,
what
that's interesting. So the people who are, are passionate about one area versus another couldn't somehow come together over this issue and others.
And that is why this universalism is important. It is important to understand that the girl in Iran who goes and sets fire to herself, um, she is um, very eloquently demonstrating to you that she, like you, wants to be free. Um, in Reading Lolita in Tehran, I bring two quotations from Saul Bellow at the end of the book, because even then I was worried about this country. And um, the one quotation, Bellow talks about Stalin and how Stalin pours death. We know what he is. We don't need to think. But he says the danger to democracies is our sleeping consciousness and our atrophy of feeling. And he asks those who survived the ordeal of Holocaust, how will they survive the ordeal of freedom? I think we've forgotten in democracies that freedom is an ordeal. It is not all fun and games and going to the movies and buying more clothes. People have been dying for freedom. They are right now dying as we speak, and they will be dying. And I was very disappointed in how little um, people were taking positions and are taking positions without knowing the facts. And it is just based on raw emotion, you know. And what we need in countries like Iran is understanding, not hate, understanding, you know. And I hope at some point they will come together. My way of thinking about Iran's liberation, quote unquote, is the South African model. I think that we need to tell people over here about what is going on in the world. But when I came here, I discovered that my family, who had just left Iran, was more curious about America and its history than Americans were. And there should be give and take between universities and students. Um, I'm hope, you know, crisis is sometimes good for us because it reminds us that it makes right now everybody in this country is asking itself, what does it mean to be an American? And in Iran, the same thing happened. People were asking, what does it mean to be Iranian? And they went into their past and found a continuity between Ferdowsi and Cyrus's. Um, uh, by the way, just remembered that one other thing Iranian people do, many times they go to the shrines of their poets. The shrines are, monuments are very beautiful of these poets. And they go to the shrine, they sometimes talk to the poet, what they want is just to be able to live, you know.
You've sparked an idea because there have been these debates over what what historic monuments in the United States should stand, which ones should be
Oh,
taken
yeah,
down.
right.
And I was actually talking to a history professor about this when there was a debate over whether to take down. There's a statue of Lincoln in Washington, D.C.,
Really?
and it's about emancipation. Frederick Douglass was at the opening to unveil it. It was actually funded by freed black people. There was a debate because this statue of Lincoln has a black man, an African American, at sort of in chains, but breaking his chains
Oh,
because of Lincoln. But he's at the feet of Lincoln, and so,
oh,
many people felt like
that is
that's not the right image to have. And I spoke to this, Professor David Blight, who's one of the great experts on the Civil War and Reconstruction, and he said he would hate to take something with that historical significance, where Frederick Douglass himself, who didn't necessarily love the image, but he was part of that whole movement to memorialize this. He said maybe instead of taking down certain monuments, we should add to it. And so the original is there, and just you've made such a powerful case for the power of poetry, which does connect with people. It takes the right poem, and maybe we don't have any single poet in the United States at the moment who maybe connects across divides. I'm thinking through, but I'm just thinking, when you say Iranians are asking, what does it mean to be Iranian? And Americans are asking, what does it mean to be an American? Maybe there's a new shrine or a new memorial that helps people address that question in some productive way. So you have a great imagination. You've written eloquently about the power of imagination. If you come up with any ideas, let me know. I'll spread the word. And the final question I'll ask you: what would you call what should the title of this conversation that we just had be?
Okay. First of all, one thing I wanted to say, maybe we can link it to that. I look at Jefferson, apart from the slavery part, but he, in his own time, was a Renaissance man. And the fact that America is defined through its founders as a beautiful idea that I mean, how many political documents begin with pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? How many of them? I mean, I was really touched by that before the second time I came here. And
And so it might not be this monument we're looking to create
No,
might,
it's something in remembrance.
but this monument may be not the image of a person, not necessarily any particular image. Maybe it should be, and maybe it is, those words. Whether it's the first sentence
Yeah.
of the Declaration of Independence, which Walter Isaacson just wrote a book
Yeah.
about,
So that's
and maybe that should be the monument that we create, and it's in every single state, and certainly in Washington, D.C. We'll keep thinking about that. But the title for this conversation, I'm not going to let you off the hook on this, but I'll give you days to think about it if you want.
okay. Yeah, give me, because no, this is difficult, really.
Okay. I've asked this question again of the woman who will now be called the insubordinate subversive. And I look forward to, I really do look forward to more conversations.
We could find something with the word subversive.
Azar Nafisi, once again, this was not our first conversation. I pray that it is not our last conversation. I don't think it will be.
This has been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this Wavemaker conversation. And, it just started. I was curious about the 40-day mourning period. You have given me and us, the listeners, so many observations and insights and really poetry to grasp onto that doesn't leave us passive, but I feel makes us think about what can we do with this knowledge we got. And there are specific, there's no one prescription that you're giving us, but there's a lot of inspiration there. So I feel as, you know what, I feel like I do when I get a runner's high.
Thank you. You mentioned, you were just saying I was curious, and I said, there you go. Curiosity is starting something.
It always starts something, as long as as long as you don't satisfy your curiosity simply by doing a Google search or AI search, which is a whole other subject, which I might want to come back to you on as we all wrestle with this issue of artificial intelligence, and at the same
Okay.
time wrestle with, as you often talk about and have talked about here, this idea of connecting with other people being the real great source of power and sustenance. So Azar, thank you again.
May I just tell you, you see that you did this. Nabokov says curiosity is insubordination in its purest form. Maybe we can use this somehow for.
We can, you know what? Let's make it, you know how people have reading clubs? Let's,
Yeah.
you and I start right now, the Insubordinates Club.
Great. And that gives me hope.